Others have pointed to the evolutionary outcome of cities. Gregory Bateson has written on how the flexibility of living systems are like a tightrope swaying from one position of stability to another to maintain balance. A key feature of an ecological understanding of urbanism is the capacity to be reversible, evolving, and provisory, owing much to the analogy of nature as a living organism. In increasingly urbanized contexts, there is a need to understand the relationships between ecosystems capable of sustaining a diversity of animal and plant life and the city, the organism that has evolved to specialize in sustaining human life. The city has long been categorized and understood to be a barrier for the movement and rhythms of ecological elements. The origin of the word city comes from the early word for enclosure, and this has manifested itself in the walled cities of medieval and Roman Europe, which sought to remove themselves from wilderness. In despite of this, the popularity of cultivated gardens has proved the determination of European colonizers to bring order and to enforce rule and dominion over nature, and by implication, the native inhabitants. This view of nature is highly restrictive and prohibits the role of organic processes in daily life, making them out to be messy and uncivilized. Kongjian Yu shows the relationship between the prevailing human attitudes towards cosmetic beauty and gentrification have emanated from the view of the human being transplanted to the surrounding environment. Yu describes the process by which native, messy, and productive shrubs are replaced with fancy flowers that bear no fruit, which results in a landscape that is unhealthy, deformed, and deprived of functionality. Sustainability is not just a consequence of passive activities. Nature is a series of overlapping cycles of energy transfers, some of which are self-stabilizing, while others are destabilizing and chaotic. There is a need to understand the value of self-sustaining systems when planning, and to look beyond the immediacy of rapid development, to avoid catastrophic consequences in the natural and human environment. Looking at the design process as a constellated reality considers a multitude of actions and reactions between people, energies, and resources. Within these exchanges, there are synergies and relations which cannot be understood in pure separation. As cities are in a constant state of flux, what we observe is a temporary moment in a fluctuating field, otherwise understood as a momentary equilibrium of forces between individuals, collectives, and institutions. Researching the potential of flexible planning processes in the global south is considered important because of the poor availability of data and maps in these regions. In Kochi, Kerala, the authors were involved in a research project gathering data for the analysis of the city's urban form, collating responses to a citizen-led survey, and drawing plot boundaries from a variety of primary and secondary sources. The studio considered the definition of livability and concluded that an important attribute of the livable city is its capacity to encompass all of the inhabitants of the city. The threat of catastrophe in Kochi from rising sea levels caused by climate change, as well as the degradation of natural flood defences, such as mangrove forests, can be seen as entangled issues relating to the human development of estuarine backwaters. This research points to the potential of the city to be understood more holistically by integrating system dynamics through the advances in computer sciences. Complex simulations utilizing agent-driven algorithms can explore a variety of outcomes based on different variables. Cities can be understood in dynamic urban simulation models through exploring the relationships between organisms, built structures, and their natural environments. The early models used in the simulation and prediction of urban development find their origin in the work of John Conway and his influential Game of Life, which consisted of a two-dimensional orthogonal grid of cells. Each cell has exactly two possible states, dead or alive. A set of 4 rules based on the state of the neighboring cells determine whether the cell will be dead or alive in the next generation. This very simple setup allows a wide variety of different patterns to emerge after the program runs for several generations. This, in relation to the real-world phenomena, becomes apparent when realizing the development of form and land use patterns in cities are, like in Conway's grid, influenced by the interaction of agents through bottom-up processes informed by simple rules. Koenig et al. Proposes an integrated system dynamic simulation, using the stocks and flows approach to represent aspects of urban simulations. They propose the theoretical framework of urban metabolism as a model to facilitate the description and analysis of stocks and flows of the materials and energies within cities. The authors are particularly interested in the interactions of natural and human systems in relation to the rapid expansion and urbanization of Kochi, the development of human settlements at the fringes where humans and animal species coexist has caused severe interferences with local ecosystems. The authors first tested their approach when trying to understand the coalescence of literature sources about livable cities. The approach consisted of a textual analysis, parsing text from literature sources through a word cloud generation script in R, and then using Tableau to examine the relationships between texts. This method allowed for a decentralized analysis of the relationships between textual sources, with centralities appearing as emergent as opposed to the more unreliable subjective narration of similarities. The author decided to take this approach forward by creating a network model for the stakeholders of Kochi for interpreting the ecosystem threats and opportunities and connecting a variety of stakeholders within an ecosystem relating to their common threats and opportunities. Understanding the relationships between human agencies and Kochi goes some way in exploring through systems thinking how the city might be approached by an urban designer. However, it does abstract the network of human actors within the complex system from other life forms and their networks, and there's a danger of seeing the humans above or outside of nature. Collating data for the species network was achieved by the authors through tabulating the 231 species found in a number of surveys for the Mangalavanam. Through linking the species based on predation information found on the India Biodiversity Portal, a network graph was produced. The results of this network graph allowed the authors the ability to have greater insight into the ecological scenarios and found that the mangrove species was the most interconnected species through the measure of betweenness centrality and eigenvector centrality. These findings revealed empirically to the authors that the mangrove had a central role to play in the ecological landscape of Kochi. In order to understand the dynamics of human and natural populations, the authors identified data sets capturing human population density as well as green space density in an area of Kochi. Trying to gather this sort of data was important for the researchers, and they had to use novel methods of gathering in this process. For the population data, authors used WorldPop, an open source demographic data set that spatially aggregates census data to a resolution of 100 meters. A similar resolution was derived from remote sensing data sets using satellites monitoring seasonal evapotranspiration, which is the cooling effect of green infrastructure in cities. The resulting raster data sets could be then processed into land parcels using the zonal statistics function. This allowed the researchers to have visualized data sets of the city with live values for biodiversity and population density. After going some way to understand the interdependencies and relations between species and stakeholders, the authors turned their attention to enacting these relationships spatially to the geography of the city. They had to choose a statistical model, and it was selected for the simulation, the wolf sheep predation model, an open source model found on the NetLogo repository. The appropriateness of this statistical model was appraised based on its prevalence in the natural world, but was reconfigured by the authors in a novel way to represent human dependency on nature through consumption of natural resources and the inverse threat of extinction through habitat destruction. The authors owe much to Koenig et al. In the integration of the land parcels and of the urban area as areas of differing activity for different populations. It was anticipated that the interactivity of these populations would point spatially to areas in the city that, based on their centralities, would be more attractive for consumption by humans and nature. The results of this simulation showed that after 100 iterations, natural and human populations had clustered in different neighboring patterns across the urban area vernacular. Whereas the natural populations seemed to be evenly dispersed through the city, the human population densities seemed to reinforce the existing data sets. This shows that in areas where humans had vacated, natural populations had stronger selection favor. This reinforces the justification for allowing areas of low utility for human occupation to be left fallow for natural populations and processes to occur. These methods are flexible and can assist different researchers from different backgrounds to work collaboratively on solutions in cities, with an emphasis on sustainable systemic thinking as a response to ecological issues in cities. There's a need for these tools to be open and democratic, as well as being able to be used effectively by planners without technical expertise. This will require further development in order to integrate the complex algorithmic explorations into a user-friendly platform.